Joining us now is Alex Main, the Director of International Policy at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Very good to have you on the program. How bad is the situation now between the U.S. and Venezuela?
Well, on the face of it, it's looking very bad. You have the biggest military buildup in the Caribbean in recent history, at least since the Cold War. You have an aircraft carrier, the most advanced and largest aircraft carrier, carrying dozens of fighter jets that has just arrived as well in the Caribbean. Everything seems to indicate that the U.S. is preparing for a war. And yet, officially, this is just about dealing with drug traffickers. And of course, over the past 2 months, there have been 22 small boats of suspected drug trafficking boats that have been blown up by U.S. military forces. Many argue, and I would as well, that this is entirely illegal. Any sort of violent, lethal use of the U.S. Military requires authorization of the U.S. Congress, which the administration has not received, and yet they continue. But this is looking like something much bigger than just blowing up small boats. As bad as that is, things could look much worse very soon if some of these major military assets are deployed against Venezuela, which, there are many reports that this is among the plans that the administration may have now in the region.
So is it just about drug smuggling, or are there bigger issues at play here? I mean, you mentioned the massive buildup of U.S. military personnel and equipment in the region.
It's very hard to argue with a straight face that this is just about drug trafficking. One, because a lot of this military activity is in the southern part of the Caribbean. There is, some transiting of drugs there, but it's much less than what you see on the Pacific side of South America, coming out of Colombia and Ecuador. It's very marginal, and most of the drugs coming out of, the Caribbean are actually headed towards Europe. That's something that's very well known. And, moreover, these threats against Venezuela, the latest accusations, of course, that Maduro heads this transnational cartel, the so-called Cartel de los Soles, which arguably actually doesn't exist. There's not much evidence for it. There's just no real substantive, argument that suggests that this is really about drug trafficking. Instead, it seems to be about what we saw in the first Trump administration, which is an effort to achieve regime change in Venezuela, which of course failed during the first Trump administration. But it looks like they are trying to use military pressure and perhaps a military intervention in Venezuela to try to force regime change there, to topple the government of Nicolás Maduro.
Now, there's a report in the Washington Post recently that basically said that Maduro has reached out to both Russia and China for help when it comes to fighting off any sort of U.S. invasion. I mean, the stakes are immense here if a war breaks out. Do you think that Trump and Maduro are going to sort of see eye to eye, sit down and be able to work out their differences here?
Well, it's very hard to tell. I mean, early on in this Trump administration, you actually did have a dialogue between the administration and the government of Maduro. The U.S. eased up on its sanctions. The Venezuela agreed to receive Venezuelan migrants, made some other concessions to the U.S., but that has been sort of derailed over the past few months by this sort of military effort. That dialogue has been called off, but Trump keeps hinting at going either way being, attacking Venezuela outright, or resuming dialogue with Venezuela. And of course, there are now the means to attack Venezuela, perhaps not to invade Venezuela because you have 15,000 troops, but Venezuela's a pretty big country and it has at least 100,000 troops. 15,000 U.S. troops wouldn't do the trick, but certainly everything's in place to carry out some serious strikes on Venezuela. and no one really knows. And perhaps President Trump himself doesn't really know. Certainly, there are people in his administration, starting with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who very much do want to pursue this sort of violent regime change path. But it's not clear that this is something that Trump wants, and particularly as there is pushback from some of the MAGA base, from some Republicans, Rand Paul in the Senate, Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene, the two that have now succeeded with pursuing this vote to release the Epstein files that are somewhat invigorated, you could say, are also opposed to this regime change effort. So there is a tension, within the administration and within sort of the MAGA base that could be affecting, how all of this will play out.
All right, Alex Main, thank you so much for your time and analysis here on the program.